Greetings once again. This is a continuation of the long association thread. I want to apologize first of all for being passed the baton and then holding on to it for a while. This fall, this autumn has been just incredibly busy for me. I haven't really had an opportunity to make many videos, and so I knew that I wanted to get on this, but I didn't, obviously didn't do anything right away. So it's been a couple weeks since Mark in Canada, Beninsky707, passed this on to me with this album right here, Jackson Browne's Running on Empty. He mentioned quite a few things about this album, so I won't necessarily go on. I will say that I really like this album. I really enjoy this album. It's probably one of my favorite Jackson Browne albums. And it's also one of his most popular albums. Where I'm going to take this, though, is that one of the songs on here, called Love Needs a Heart, was co-written with Valerie Carter and Lowell George. And Lowell George is someone who he's a singer and a songwriter and a guitarist, and Jackson Browne and Lowell George were pretty good friends, mutual admirers, certainly. Jackson Browne, I think, once called Lowell George the Orson Welles of rock, due to his songwriting style, which is pretty unique, or was pretty unique. I should use the past tense because Lowell George is no longer with us. And I have to apologize too because I have a cold. You can probably hear that. What happened was that I knew that I wanted to make this video, and I kept having other things coming up, and I was busy and doing this, that, and the other thing, and so I kept putting it off. And finally, I said, I'm going to do it this weekend. And of course, the weekend came. Murphy's Law. I get struck down with a cold, and it's affecting my throat and everything else. So bear with me. I'm going to try and do this right. So anyway, Lowell George and Jackson Browne, really good friends with each other, and they co-wrote that song together. They wrote "Love Needs a Heart," which is one of the fairly popular songs from that album. Besides being a brilliant songwriter, Lowell George was voted, I think, number 49 or 50 in Mojo Magazine's 100 Greatest Guitarists of All Time. So pretty talented in that sense. And he was also a member of Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention in the late 60s. And I think it was in 1969 that he left Zappa's band to form Little Feat. And Little Feat, definitely sort of a southern rock boogie band. Really love these guys. Any Little Feat album that Lowell George is part of is worth having. It's worth hearing. It's definitely a good thing. This one, called Waiting for Columbus, is a double live album. I gotta see that part too. So it's a double live album. I guess I would say this is probably my favorite Little Feat album. It's definitely a killer album. Recorded in 1977, released in 1978. This thing is up there, without a doubt, as far as I'm concerned, up there with albums like the Allman Brothers at Fillmore East. Just a fabulous, killer live album. It was not all recorded in one place. It's at two different venues over a period of 2 or 3 days, on 2 or 3 nights in each venue. Fantastic album, though. They definitely took the best parts of all of it. Some of their stuff is extended versions, and some of it's been reworked, and there are different versions of their songs on here, radically different versions of their songs. Just a killer live album. I mean, this is definitely, if you don't have any Little Feat, I would strongly recommend this as being the place to start. And if you do have Little Feat, but somehow you don't have Waiting for Columbus, you need to do yourself a favor and get this. This thing was originally supposed to be a triple album, but they pared it down to a double album, and then later on some of the stuff that didn't appear on there, some of the stuff that got cut, appeared on Little Feat's Hoi Hoi compilation. If you buy the CD version of this, and I'm not recommending that, but if you buy the CD version of this, the current CD version of this, the remaster, it's got all that material on there. So all the stuff that was originally on the album, and then all the stuff that got cut as well. Definitely a must-have album. Definitely something that you should look for. This right here is Lowell George. And one of the many things that makes this album such a killer album is the inclusion of the Tower of Power horn section. And the Tower of Power horn section, sort of a fabulous horn-driven 70s funk band. Tower of Power was a horn-driven funk band. And the horn section in particular was hired out. They were hired guns on quite a few other albums, quite a few other people's albums in the 70s and 80s. And here's Tower of Power, self-titled album, Tower of Power. Band down there. This is an album that includes probably one of their biggest hits, called What Is Hip. But it's a pretty solid album all the way through. I mean, these guys are just a tight band. And like I said, they were hired guns throughout the 70s and 80s. Probably still are to a certain extent. They've worked with everybody from Huey Lewis and the News through Public Image Limited. So there's all kinds of connections that you could make with Tower of Power. I'm using them partially to make those connections, but I'm also holding this up partially because I really love this band and I really love this album. And I was lucky enough to find a pretty pristine copy of this album. It's an original pressing. As far as I know, it's an original pressing. Well, maybe not. I don't know. I know I got it a long time ago. Maybe Dr. Deadwax can tell me if it's an original pressing or not, or tell me how to find out if it's an original pressing. One of the cool things that comes with this record, not to go off on too much of a tangent, this is a little bag that was inside the record, and inside that little bag is an iron-on. Oakland, they've found the stroke, Tower of Power. And on the surface of the bag here is some instructions about how to actually iron that on. So kind of a cool little memento from the era. Obviously I've never tried to iron it onto a shirt, nor have I any desire to do that now. To me it's worth much more being a souvenir from that era. 1973 was that album, Tower of Power. I think that's their third album. I could be wrong on that. All right, so where I'm going to take this now is that one of the sax players for Tower of Power was Lenny Pickett. I'm not even sure that I could pick out Lenny Pickett in this photo in the back, because he doesn't look anything like what he looks like today. But yes, one of the saxophone players was Lenny Pickett, and Lenny Pickett not only was part of Tower of Power during their most successful era, 1972 to 1981, but also has been involved in a lot of other musical projects, both as a sax player and as an arranger and a producer, that sort of thing. He was the sax player on David Bowie's Serious Moonlight tour, which I was lucky enough to see. I was lucky enough to catch that tour. So I've seen Lenny Pickett play live. And in 1985, I think the Serious Moonlight tour was 83, 1985, Pickett started playing sax for the Saturday Night Live house band, and by 1985 had become their musical director. He's also worked with Laurie Anderson, her Strange Angels album, late 80s sometime. I was actually gonna show that Laurie Anderson album as the next one because I adore Laurie Anderson and what she's done. But I thought that one might be a little difficult for anyone else to connect to because I don't know that I've heard from too many Laurie Anderson fans in the vinyl community. But the album that I decided to run with here, the album that I decided to connect this with, because Lenny Pickett is all over it, and yet it's still fairly popular. That didn't sound right. Well, hopefully you know what I mean. Talking Heads, Little Creatures. 1985. This one. Lenny Pickett is all over this album. Pretty much any sax you hear on this album, and there's quite a bit of it, is Lenny Pickett. This is my daughter Emma's favorite Talking Heads album. I'm very proud to say that not only does she like Talking Heads, proud of that to begin with, but proud to say that she has a favorite Talking Heads record, and this is it. Talking Heads, Little Creatures, probably their most accessible album, quite possibly their most successful album. I don't know, but definitely their most accessible album. A pop album, to be sure. It's definitely a Talking Heads light. I don't know, and maybe that would be the way to put that. It's a pop album for sure. But you know, it's a pop album by a really smart band. So those two they don't always go together, pop albums and smart bands. I love that cover art too. Just fantastic cover art on this thing. So again, I chose to go this way because I wanted to make sure that I would end on some sort of relatively popular album so that I wouldn't have a very hard time choosing who to pass this on to. In the process, maybe I left it too wide open, I don't know. But I'm going to pass this on to somebody who I have had conversations with about Talking Heads. We share a mutual love for Talking Heads. I know we're not alone in that because it's a great band. A lot of people like them. I'm going to pass this on to Glowing Cabbage. I'm going to pass this on to Jeff. I'm pretty darn sure he has this album. So run with it, man. See what you can do with this. I'm looking forward to it.